Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Obviously, it's a little bit of a late hour for our first web event. My name is Elliot Volkman, and I'm the co-founder and vice president of Digital District. Today, we're going to be discussing content marketing, in particular, looking at boring subjects and turning into great content. With us, we have a fantastic panel, but I'm going to kick it off to our host for this evening, Jason Ellis, the founder of Overachiever Media. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did, and every time somebody says it, it makes me rethink the name, because I think it's very clever, but apparently very difficult to say.
Excellent. So, before we kick it off and let you do the introductions, if you want to ask any question throughout our series, feel free to use the hashtag on Twitter, DDAwesome. You can also use our contact form on our website, and feel free to tweet along with our panel as well. So, Jason, off to you.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Elliot. Thanks. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Nellis. I am the founder and CEO of Overachiever Media, based here in D.C. We are a content marketing and founders branding firm. Grew up here in D.C., very proud to be part of the community here. We have an incredible panel here. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. Let's start with Sarah, since she was so prompt earlier. Sarah, why don't you let the folks know who you are?
Great. Hi, guys. I'm Sarah Lang, on Twitter at Sarah Lang. And I'm currently a social media manager at AARP, working on a portfolio that spans from Social Security to Medicare to caregiving to the Affordable Care Act to tax aid to brain health to utilities, consumer fraud, and a few other things. So it's kind of a busy time. And before AARP, I worked on the Obama campaign. I was a digital project manager, and before that, I worked at Barack Obama. That was super fun. And I have a long history in progressive politics. And I spend a lot of time thinking about chain CPI, so you'll get to hear all sorts of ways to make even Social Security interesting.
Very cool. Let's throw it over to Tyler Gray, who was next in. Aaron, I'm sorry, you're going to be last. But
That's okay.
Not because I don't like you. Tyler, go for it, man.
Well, thank you again, for having me. I guess the brief history here in DC Tech, right after I left politics in 2009, after getting our clocks cleaned by a guy named Ken Cuccinelli. I was a former new media director for a gentleman named Steve Shannon, who ran against him for Attorney General. So it's obviously great for, I think, a lot of folks that the next time around, the next team was able to beat them. After that, I got into DC, the DC tech scene. I was very fortunate to link up with Social Media Club DC after, now Digital District, after one of my, first jobs at a small family-owned web development shop. And I've been in the industry pretty much ever since. I launched my own firm, Gray Street Solutions, after getting into graduate school at Georgetown. I'm currently finishing my master's in technology management, which I would highly recommend, as well as another new program that they're offering, a master's in systems engineering. It's a night and weekend thing. You can get it done for under 30 grand. So I've started my own company last June. It looks like we're going to make it through June. Been able to scale up, and so far so good. The Frank Underwood 2 knocks going forward.
Awesome, love that. I'll give you the third one just in case. Last and certainly not least, Aaron Bush. Aaron, take it away.
Hi, my name is Aaron. I'm on Twitter at Aaron Slick. I have a background in journalism, and so I've spent most of my career wearing multiple hats: content creator, social media marketer, and then online web experience, which is random. But I'm currently the online marketing and social media manager at Custom Ink. And prior to coming here, which is consumer focused, and we can all agree that t-shirts are super fun, I've spent most of my career writing for B2B companies, B2G companies. And so it's everything from student loans to government contracting to super high-tech technology type content and such. But I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate everybody coming. We know everybody's busy with South by coming up and packing. Tyler was telling us he's got 20 different things he's trying to do tonight. So we're going to try and keep it interesting and let Tyler get back to his packing. I'm sure he's got tons of laundry. So first things first, let's get to the meat of our subject. And anybody who wants to jump in first, feel free to go ahead. First basic question. We're dealing with a lot of different topics every day as social media managers and community managers. We've got everything from T-shirts to government to Social Security to I work with a culinary institute. There's lots of different subjects out there, some of them more interesting than not. So what do you do just from a pure 20,000-foot perspective to keep things interesting? What do you do when you have something that may not have a general snazziness about it, What do you do with that to make it more interesting and more palatable for larger audiences?
So I'll jump in. I think having people outside the space that you're working directly in makes a huge difference. So like I work on Social Security all the time. I'm 27. A lot of my friends are not thinking about Social Security all the time. I spend a lot of time thinking about if I'm trying to market to people like me or people who maybe don't spend all their time thinking about it, how is it still interesting? Because I think, particularly my experience in politics has taught me it's really easy to get hive mind and to say, among the 10 people I talk to all day, we're all super interested in the same thing. But looking at how someone outside of your bubble can see it is really important. And I also think that looking at other brands or other companies or other, candidates, whoever it is, that are doing cool things is really important. I'd say 90% of my ideas are not original. They're things that I saw on Twitter and they're awesome.
Picasso.
Can I piggyback on that too? Because I actually think there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of fodder for great content in your organization already. And I think a lot of companies make the mistake, the content folk and the companies try to look external before they look internal. And I think the difference is we look at everything with a content lens, and the people you have in your organization may not realize they have great content. And so you've got customer service people, you may have sales people, you may have technologists who may be able to help you come up with great content ideas. What are the top 10 questions that customers ask when they call in? And that might be something you can solve with a blog post or with great content.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would say, just to piggyback off that again, it's I think one of the most interesting things about this field is exactly what she just mentioned, to be able to take meetings with different parts of your same clients' organizations and see what they're doing. That's interesting or cool, and a lot of great ideas come from just doing exactly that. There's a lot going on, and your production costs are usually pretty low if you're self-generating it, and it's genuine. That's the one thing. It's not overproduced. It's right produced, and there will be a crowd out there, I think, that can always relate to that kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, I think one of the main themes that we're hearing is that good content comes organically, that it's a matter of telling the story in a way that an audience can certainly appreciate, which I think I'd like to think that anybody who's good in this space appreciates. I want to come back to something Sarah touched on and everybody else sort of mentioned a little bit as well, which is comparing yourself, or maybe it was Aaron, I apologize, but it was comparing yourself to your competitors. The idea that you look to other people for what they're doing and then take best practices and pivot. Where do you draw the line between literally copying what they're doing in your own voice versus taking what they're doing and pivoting away from it? Is there any sort of guideline that we can use as social media marketers to make sure that what we're not doing is simply just Xeroxing what somebody else is doing, but really bringing something new and innovative to an idea or technique?
Oh, go ahead.
I tend to actually look at related companies that may not be direct competitors to me. I mean, and I feel like, there are so few really original ideas anymore that as long as it's organic and what you're doing makes sense for the audience you're trying to reach, I don't think it's going to feel as iterative as if you just copy and paste, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a big difference between stealing tactics and stealing ideas outright. So one tactic that I see in the political space a lot are people holding signs. And that's something that, darn near every candidate has done at this point. Most advocacy organizations will do people holding signs.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cool if I take the exact sign that Sierra Club's holding with their exact language and use that for my campaign. That's not cool. But the tactic
now hold on
of
for a second. That Sierra Club is known for their awesome signs. How dare you, madam, besmirch the good name Sierra?
Oh, no, they have fantastic signs. That's why I'm not stealing them. People would recognize them. I'm saying, the tactic of having people tell their story, that's something that's applicable across brands, across campaigns, across all sorts of advocacy groups. So I'll be the first to say, when I came to AARP, we didn't ever use people holding signs. That was a new tactic that we were using. And one of our best posts that we've done was someone holding a sign with, a line about Social Security. And so I think when you're looking at tactics, that's totally cool to take and iterate off of. I think when you're looking at exactly what someone has done, that's when you need to be concerned, both because you're not going to get the kind of results that you want, but also it's just not really fair play in the space that we're in.
Sure. Tyler, any thoughts?
I guess I would add on that. There's a, I don't know if we can share pictures here, but if you just Google agile marketing BMW, it's a great example of sort of taking what your competitor did, but then really raising it up a notch. Long story short, an Audi dealership in Santa Monica put up this ad that said, "You remove BMW." The BMW dealership put up a bigger ad with a white BMW. The Audi was black that said, "Checkmate." Audi goes and puts up another billboard that says, "Your pawn is no match for our king." And then it's like, okay, what do you do? Well, what BMW did is they got a blimp with their Formula One car and hung it on top of the Audi ad and said, "Game over." So, it's, the way I sort of look at things is, how do you get stuff like that to happen? And I think a big part of really getting the creative stuff is having, sort of the C-level buy-in from your client to your organization to not have to be like, "Oh my God, I got to go through a purchase order because I need a blimp." What do you need a blimp for? Well, I've got to one up the Audi guys. I can't explain it. Just show me the money and let's do it.
But who doesn't need a blimp? Now wait a minute. Don't shoot ideas.
I want a blimp. Why don't I get a blimp?
No, I appreciate that. Look, I think what we're touching on here is the idea that being responsive in the space and being innovative doesn't necessarily come from stealing, but informed and reactive decisions that make a lot of, can make a lot of sense in the right context. If you're just joining us, just want to welcome you. We are engaged in a lot of different conversations here. If you have any questions you want to ask us, we are watching #DDAwesome. That's DDAWESOME, and we will keep moving on. Next question for you guys. So not all social media sites work for every audience. Every audience is individual, whether you are engaging them on Facebook or on Twitter. So one of the constant, I think, challenges for folks in our space is keeping a consistent message, but using all of our resources in a way that doesn't spread us too thin. So if for example, I'm managing for an account Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, Vine, and YouTube, if it's just me by myself, those are getting pretty thin. IFT, as an example, IFTTT.com, is one way to manage that, but it replicates everything across the board. What are your guys' thoughts on finding ways and resources to be individual on each platform without being repetitive or redundant? Don't everybody jump in at once here on this one, guys.
Well, this is a big one.
I would say, you don't have to play on every platform. I have one client, they're a defense contractor. There are people who have legitimate objections, and those who don't to what we do. We make weapons. So I'm not going to do well on Pinterest. I'm not going to do well on some other places with them. And that's okay. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. And I don't have the manpower, woman power, or any, the staffing to do it. We don't have the content to support it. So I would think the worst thing is, if it's going to be stale, if it is getting stale, then to maybe just sunset it or lobby for more resources. This one's a good one.
And I think it's really important to look at where your audience is. At AARP, we've decided Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are our 3 primary goals. And that's not to say we don't work on other platforms or play on other platforms. We do some caregiving work on Pinterest because there are a lot of women and a lot of caregivers on Pinterest. But looking at where your audience is, I could spend 2 hours on Snapchat, but let's be honest, there aren't a lot of 50-plus folks using Snapchat, particularly not in an advocacy lens. That's crazy talk. And so I think really trying to maximize your resources by going to where your audience is or where you want your audience to be is important, and laying out those goals and making sure you don't join platforms just for the sake of it. Sure, we could do a Snapchat program, but it doesn't help if it's not getting us closer to our goals, and it doesn't help if we're not reaching our target audience.
I'd say, too, what do you want customers and people to do, right? And so if you want them to respond to a poll, Instagram is not your platform, right? Facebook is your platform. And so when you come at it and you're making goals for each of these things, what action do you want people to take? Is it information? Is it, I want you to fill out a form, or I want to engage with you? And I think that's going to inform where you should be, and at least where you should spend the bulk of your time.
So let me jump in here and actually ask one of the Twitter questions that has come up, and I apologize because I'm totally going to bastardize names if I try, but at Mark Pillip, and that's MarkPilip, asked about the BMW versus Audi thing, who sold more cars? It's not necessarily about blimps. It's that marketing is about ROI, right? I mean, where do you draw the line between really compelling, interesting stories and actually converting to sales? Where's that balance that you have to find with clients to, help them appreciate that they need to blow things out of the water, but at the same time it has to lead back to actual revenue generation?
That's a tough one. And I think the way to do that is to put it in a little bit of historical context. It used to be the case that, half of all advertising dollars are wasted and you don't know which ones because, it used to be just do print, just do broadcast, and maybe somebody is watching TV at the same time. Maybe they're not. But guess what? If you're doing TV ads in Northern Virginia, D.C., the DVR penetration around here is 79 to 82%. So unless you're doing live sports, nobody's watching your TV ads. You do have, if you have the digital component, you have the benefit of these numbers that are, that are hard to argue with. There's always the example of, it's been coming out over the last couple of weeks with the Facebook, link clicking farms, throwing off people's accounts. Yeah, that happens, but people are concerned about vanity metrics, not, called likes. They're not concerned about whatever's next. So, it's a tough, it's going to be a leap of faith. There's always going to be, some failures, but, I think if you communicate honestly and openly, set expectations medium high, but, then over deliver is always a good one. And also realizing that, depending on who you're reporting to, like the C-suite level, they, a favorite tweet is, they're not going to say, difference between favoriting and retweeting. So they're going to, know who you're reporting to and try to tier appropriately. In terms of the sales question, I believe BMW's ahead nationally. You'd have to check me on that, but I don't know how you find out about that in San Diego. What I do know is that because they did that, they've gotten an incredible amount of traction. People are writing articles about this that they couldn't have paid for. Similar to, the Oscars last night where, Ellen might have an iPhone in her personal life, but, she was using that Samsung, and then they break Twitter. So Esurance threw them $1.5 million or whatever at, their Super Bowl Twitter thing, and they got blown out of the water by, something more clever, than Samsung. So it remains to be seen, I guess.
I think it comes down to what, again, with your goals. Like, there are 3 plays you can have with this: direct response, stunt marketing, and then a brand play. And I think we could put the BMW Audi competition firmly in the stunt and the brand play, which of course is going to get them more media attention. Is that going to directly result in sales? Probably not. But if you have softer numbers that you can report on a brand perspective, stunts and brand plays may work well for you. If you're specifically going for a direct response focus, then you're going to have to code a URL, you're going to have to put a form in front of people, and you're going to have a completely different approach to, if Audi was talking about, or if they were trying to sell a paper on their engine, right, or if they're trying to share a paper on their engine, a billboard's not going to work anyway. And so, again, it comes back to, for me, what am I trying to get people to do? If I'm trying to get them to give me a response in some way, beyond just publicity, I'm going to choose different tactics to hit those marks.
Well, and to piggyback off that, it depends on if you're looking at short-term or long-term goals as well. So, once again, going back to the work that I do at AARP, and sorry to keep harping on it, but that's, sort of where my level of experience is, we can make a play for the most memberships in one weekend. And that might be really great in terms of showing our ROI on Twitter, how many people we can get to sign up for membership that weekend. But our bigger question is relevance. Our bigger question is, do people in the boomer category want to join the AARP? Do they see the AARP as representing people like them? And so a lot of our time goes into showcasing boomer history and doing things with the Beatles and doing things that are relevant to 45 to 60-year-olds, not necessarily in a direct play to get them to convert that day or even that week, but so that they see AARP as a place that is relevant to them. So I think you need to have an appropriate breakdown of your short-term goals and that short-term ROI, but also long-term your brand relevance, and if you're reaching the consumers that you need to be reaching over the long term. And I think that's where some of the BMW Audi stuff plays in, is not even people who are going to purchase a car this week or this month, it's the people who are thinking about a car purchase and therefore are going into it with that level of brand awareness and, feeling that that company might be right for them based on their advertising or based on the stunts that they're pulling. And so I think it's a real balance between trying to show direct ROI and long-term, brand brand
Sure.
growth. I can't talk today, sorry.
Well, then this is the perfect forum for you not to be able to talk. That's spectacular. Thank you.
I'm getting over laryngitis. It's been a really rough 2 weeks, guys.
I'm not going to lie to you. I'm just hearing a lot of excuses. Anyway.
This is what I do.
So let me ask then this. One of the things that I think a lot of people are these days holding up as sort of the golden example of how internet marketing and real-time marketing can be most effective is, of course, the referred to as the Oreo moment in the Super Bowl last year. The idea that in a moment of unpredictable stuff coming out of left field, a brand has a moment of being able to jump in and say the right thing at the right time and really suddenly engage people in a way that they couldn't have ever predicted, let alone paid for. What are your guys' thoughts on finding moments in real time, events that are happening, things like the Oscars or premieres of TV shows like Downton Abbey or The Walking Dead or sports events or things like that, where brands that may not necessarily have a direct relationship try to inject themselves into the real-time moment there? I guess the larger question is real-time marketing something that is sort of kitschy, and if you happen to get it, that's awesome, and that otherwise you should, sort of expect failure? Or is it something that really should be as a tool in our back pocket that there are things that we can do to plan for in that vein?
Well, I mean, I think all of those moments are things that we can plan for, right? Like, we can say the Super Bowl is going to be a huge media moment, and it's going to be a huge moment for a lot of brands. We don't know specifically what that moment in the Super Bowl is going to be, but we know that that's a huge event. And I think that, what we saw with that and with Oreo, but with some other brands as well, looking at the Grammys, looking at similar events, is that the places where social media strategists are really empowered to do what they're good at are the places where companies are successful. So the places where everyone who needs to approve, they're in one room, or they can get the budget for the blimp. Whatever that is, giving the people who are actually in the game day to day the power to make those calls during a moment is really important, because otherwise you get the responses that are 3 hours late and no one's talking about it anymore, and they just come across as kind of phony. But I think you also need to evaluate what your brand or your candidate or your campaign is, and whether or not it's an appropriate play. So like Charmin got a lot of crap, pun not intended, for some of their less good.
Hold on, everybody. Whether you're on camera or not, let's a little slow clap there. That was awesome. All right, spectacular.
I'm trying not to swear. It's really hard. But they've had a lot of brand tweets that feel honestly pretty forced. That are let's welcome the prince with his royal diapers. That just are kind of silly and not very good. So I think the real, the key there is both empowering your social media people to make the call to, to pull the trigger and to have the approvers in the room, but also having people that you trust who've been monitoring the conversation, who are going to know if it feels, sort of in line with the dialogue, or if it's just going to feel like you're trying too hard. Not every brand is going to have a big moment every big event. That's not a realistic expectation. You want to be ready in case there is one, and you should certainly know what the big moments are for your space, but you're not going to have one every time there's a big media event. It's just not realistic.
Let me ask this just to pivot real quick. Are there brands that have no business doing any live events? I mean, as an example, if I manage a lawn care business, the likelihood, that my social media marketer, assuming that I have one, is probably not going to have a lot to talk about that's timely. I mean, is there a line to draw between certain businesses just don't belong in real-time marketing?
Yes.
If you're a funeral home, you should not be marketing during The Walking Dead. I'm sorry, you shouldn't do it.
I don't know. That seems kind of fun, actually. Wait a minute. We may have just
I think the potential for that is way more on the fail side than the win side.
It has to be organic. It has to be organic, right? And you have to have a legitimate play for your audience. So, for example, I worked for a company that helped marketers with data and segmenting their data. So a Super Bowl play, if you're discussing the advertising and you're discussing the audience they're trying to reach, is going to feel normal and organic. But if I'm just randomly talking about who won at the Oscars, from that branded channel, that makes absolutely no sense. So, where my mantra is know your audience, know what they care about, do they have a stake in whatever big event is going on? And if they do, then I think you can think creatively about things that might happen that you can plan for. Otherwise, DiGiorno's tweet about the pizza was pretty funny, but I don't know that it did anything for them other than give them the 20 minutes on Twitter that people were discussing it, right? So what's your return on investment in having all the decision makers in a room, and how much money does that cost, and all of that? I think you have to think about that as well.
On the other hand, you don't want to be pulling strings during the Marco Rubio moment and not do anything.
Exactly.
And so I think there's also a line of like, I'd say for any major brand, and how you define major brand is probably different, but like for any major brand, you should have someone who's aware of the big moments that are going on so you don't miss an opportunity like that, even if it's not having all the decision makers in the room, it's having someone who can respond from your brand account with a tweet, because they didn't get something up for like 7 or 8 hours. It was appalling.
And I will say too, Oreo did a very good job of empowering their people, and to the point that they could respond so quickly because all the decisions were made. You are empowered, you have the authority, just do it and don't ask questions. And I think that is really, if you're going to be one of those brands that plays in that space, you have to have that.
I would just add, for the examples of what not to do or be inspired by, it's a condescending corporate brand page on Facebook. They also have a Twitter. I think it's a great showcase of when people get it absolutely wrong. It's it's a good thing to get the constant updates about. I'll share one thing we're dealing with now. That's when you get controversial news stories and whether or not you weigh into that. You obviously have the classic example of Kenneth Cole trying to sell shoes during what was going on in Egypt, which is that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we've got another one right now with one of our clients. They're a trade association that's pretty boring. The American Maritime Partnership. So it deals with shipping, transatlantic shipping of goods. Pretty boring, right? Okay. But what if there's a ship that's chartered from I don't know, pick a random country with a random crew. Do you trust these people to, transport oil or something sensitive, up and down the Mississippi River? If they make a mistake, who's liable for it? So it's like when the story comes out about an accident, it's like, okay, even though the most recent one, involved domestic ships, what, hey, at least there's accountability, and there's stuff like that. And I think an important part of that is, just on the client management side, trying to brief them that, hey, we might get some negative pushback about this. Here's what I think it'll be. And in politics, you're going to get it a lot. There's going to be people who are just going to reflexively not like what you're doing. And if you can just clear those expectations a little bit more with your client, that hey, if I'm running a promoted tweet with one of my clients, and this is a defense contractor, I'm going to get, we're going to get some stuff back. People who have, valid opinions, not always, as well informed, and that as I might like, but hey, their opinions are valid, this is going to happen, and that's okay if we achieve our objective, which in this recent case with the promoted tweet, I spent a few $1,000s and was able to get this one article by the British ambassador picked up by basically all the defense trade rags. So to put an ad in something like a Politico Morning Defense is in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000, and there's other newsletters. So for about I ended up spending about $5,000. So for $5,000 in promoted tweets, yeah, we got some nasty stuff back, but I was able to earn the equivalent of almost over $100,000 worth of advertising if I had to pay for the space everywhere I wanted. So it's win some, lose some, but just try to win more than you lose, right?
I think that's the goal for everybody, sure.
But that's really important. I think a lot of brands or a lot of people who are newer to the space are worried about the lose some. And to some extent, most of what you do on social is going to come at a fairly low cost. Maybe it costs some time, but it's, you're not losing millions of dollars here unless you're doing social in a very different way than I've ever gotten to do social. So, you need to sort of let the people in your organization know there are going to be successes, there are going to be failures. It's part of playing in this space. And we're going to try and win more than we lose, and we're going to try and have bigger wins than we have losses. And obviously you should be showing a winning track record, but if you're not losing some, you're probably not moving the game forward very far.
I think a key point to Tyler's point as well, though, is having the self-awareness to know what kind of trolls you're going to get back, right? And I think, who was it? Was it the Suburban campaign where they wanted people to make a social media ad for them, and they all came back as oil guzzlers, and it was a complete disaster. It was a couple years ago.
Sure. Or the Lay's, what was it? The Lay's,
right.
The Lay's, make up your own flavors.
Make up your own flavor.
baby diapers and sadness or something.
Right, which they actually played pretty well with. You know, they responded pretty well with that, and sort of, you know, they made bags and the whole thing. But having enough self-awareness when you try these things and to prep your executives or whomever, you know, like, look, here's what we might get. But again, if the balance is teetered more on success than failure, then I think you roll with the punches and you take your successes where you could get them. But if you're afraid to try, you're never going to know because you're afraid of those negative comments or you're afraid of the stuff you might get back.
Sure.
Like, you have to be willing to suck it up and just deal.
Yep. So a couple things real quick. First, if anybody is interested, sorry, I'm losing it. The condescending corporate brand page. The Digital District account has tweeted out that address. I highly recommend checking it out. It's great examples of terrible ideas.
Don't do them.
No, please. These are the opposite of what you should be doing. So a couple things I wanted to take from Twitter real quick. So Sarah Feltz, and that is at Sarah Feltz, has pinged us a couple of times. First of all, if you have any more good puns about funeral homes doing live marketing, we should throw those her way because I think she's pretty eager for that.
I swear I usually am not the person doing puns. This is a one-off appearance.
No, I'm not going to lie to you. Usually that's my job. I'm the terrible guy at parties who sits there all night just trying to think of them. But one thing that she asked that I think we should go towards is, first, with a brand that doesn't have enough content to tweet 2-3 times a day, is it okay to recycle the same content in different phrasing? And I want to tie this back a little bit first to the idea of, is her premise correct? Can you foresee an instance in which there is a type of business that you would work for where there just simply isn't enough content being generated? As an example, Aaron, government contracting. Does government contracting have enough that you can tweet about it 3 times a day? I mean, it seems to me, as somebody who is not involved in government, that's a stretch.
Yeah, it's a stretch. It's true.
Sorry.
Thanks, Elle. That's awesome. No, I mean, look, I think, and I think this is, people will throw these numbers out, like, you've got to tweet 9 times in order for people to see it. 80% of your content should be other people, 80% of what you share should be other people's stuff, and only 20% a direct sale. So I think if you are even remotely aware of what's going on in your industry, there is plenty of content to share. It doesn't matter whether you're a funeral home director or, whether you're selling computers. If you are aware of what's happening in your industry, there's plenty of content to share. I think it gives you good social karma to share other people's stuff. It from a government contracting, I might have to ponder that for a second.
I'm sure we can get the Jeopardy theme going if you need it.
I'm trying to, look, hey, in government contracting, we used to go through the this site that's asking for proposals to pick the most random proposals that the government needs 7,000 sports bras. Or I'm serious. The Army needed, what was it? It was a ridiculous number of sports bras, and a small firm in Minnesota won that contract, and that was a great story, right? And so again, you can find inspiration in the most random of places if you're aware of what's actually happening in your industry.
Is it like selling to the government or being?
That was selling to the government.
Well, this also gets back to what we were talking about earlier about picking what spaces you play in. So if you're looking at your client and you can't find something to put on Pinterest once a week, then maybe Pinterest isn't the right space for you. And I think on Twitter there's always enough content that you can come up with if you're, like Aaron said, being generous, sharing other people's content, finding interesting ways to package it. But if you're looking at one of the sort of slightly less mainstream platforms and you don't have that content stream or you can't figure out how to get to that content stream, you might need to evaluate if your efforts would be better spent somewhere else. So maybe it makes more sense for whatever you're doing to be focused more on Facebook or more on Tumblr or in more of a blog form if you don't feel like you can keep up a steady flow of content on Twitter.
I guess the only thing I would add is, I think how much content you really need to generate is different. There might not be a lot of people who are interested in very narrow segments of government contracting, and that's okay. In some ways, I think that makes it a little bit easier because, the people who are trying to reach, if they're, DoD people, if they're, State Department, whatever, acquisitions program, there's not that many of them. And consequently, you can get, if you're trying to advertise to them, you can just do way better on the precision targeting, not by, I just ran a campaign where, like, yeah, we could have targeted the, people who follow at State Department, but, oh, wait, the State Department spends an ungodly amount of money to buy all those followers. So, no, instead of running my promoted tweet against at State Department, let me look at who the senior communication staff is in the, State Department. Oh, I will hit them and their smaller group, but I'll own 100% share of voice, and that's fine. We're not going to put up stratospheric, Super Bowl or Oscar numbers, but we don't need to, and that's quite all right.
Sure. Well, let's pivot from that a little bit. So obviously, making sure that you have the right information, the right tools for the trade are very important to ensuring that you have the right strategy in place. Can you guys talk a little bit about what techniques or tools that you recommend to help find topics that are relevant to individual audiences? I mean, feel free to talk about platform specific too if you think there's something valuable there. I think for me at least, I manage a variety of brands as part of my organization. They're not necessarily interconnected, so I'm constantly having to figure out, am I using the right tools for the right job? Am I using one tool to spread thin? Do you guys have any thoughts on that, or any particular advice you want to offer the audience?
I would say, for me, I think the Google AdWords tool is actually really useful, and not just from an SEO perspective, although that's a nice side effect, is that if you're writing content people are searching for, you're going to get a bump in SEO. But I do think, I'm trying to think of, like, when I was a reporter, I found story ideas in the most random places. You overhear something in a coffee shop, right? And so to me, the keyword the Google AdWord tool is sort of the technology equivalent of that. And so you know what terms you're looking for in your industry. What else are they searching for? And is there some way that you can turn that into something useful? I think that's a good tool that most people don't use. And monitoring social media, again, social media is about listening. It's not just about throwing out content, right? You have to listen to what these people are actually talking about. And so you can get shocking, I know, but you can get you can get a lot of ideas from that as well.
And that's, I guess, what I would say. Like, I'm all about whatever tools help you listen, but I think that 90% of this really is listening to your target audience and seeing what they're personally sharing and seeing what they're talking about and seeing what they're responding to on your page. So if, at AARP we see that people are responding really well to sex and dating advice, then we know that we need to share more sex and dating advice. And that might not be, my first inclination as a page manager for AARP, but that's something that we're seeing, twice or 3 times the number of shares on and, 10 times the number of comments on. That's clearly something that there's a hunger for.
Zombies. Always.
So, clearly the answer is...
Well, we have a lot of great AARP sex and dating advice. One of my favorite articles is, I'm 67, she's 34, how young is too young?
Wow.
You can look it up on our website. I may have gotten the ages wrong, but that's roughly the age spread. We have a lot of great information. I'd advise you to check it out.
I have so many thoughts that I'm not going to share because this is not the appropriate response. I don't feel good about it. Not going to lie to you.
You laugh, but I guarantee that your parents would like to have an active sex life as much as you do.
Wow, you are going down a rabbit hole none of us have time for. Tyler,
so to return to the point that Aaron made, I think a couple other people
about zombies.
About a 35-year-old spread.
It's about besides all that, but also looking internally what kind of resources. I think this is true. Let's say if you're in a business-to-business environment, especially. If you're going to be dealing with somebody else that you're buying or selling something to, people like to do business with people they like. I mean, it might not be perfectly political correct, but, if you feel that you can vibe and work well with somebody, maybe it's the best, your client likes to go out and drink coffee or drink bourbon or what have you. And maybe if you do that and you share that, you will, you'll win some clients and you'll lose some, but at least you'll have some commonality. And I think, if you've got if you're representing a client and they've got an interesting team of people, employees have hobbies, and putting your employees' stories out there. Maybe you've got somebody who's a champion. I don't know what. Maybe not an adult kickball, but something that maybe it's a little bit more nerdier and into your scope. That you can use as content to share, and that demonstrates thought leadership, and it helps your SEO results you have, your VP of engineering or whatever else. It's like why I'm sure there would be a lot of people to return the BMW Audi if maybe they made their senior engineers accessible more often to, answer questions about the performance of their cars. Or if they had a sophisticated enough system to figure out that, hey, we're talking about buying BMWs and Audis right now. Why, how quickly can they get, promoted tweet up on this hashtag? Who knows?
But I think that's a really important point about tapping all the people in your organization to be active on social in the ways that are appropriate or accessible. Like, you've got so many people internally who are smart and who are, interesting and who know a lot about various subjects and who can help at various stages of the process if a consumer is looking at buying or they're looking at getting involved. And, empowering more people to be the voice of your organization than just the official spokespeople, I think is really important. And especially if they're willing to have a little bit of character. So if you're willing to have someone come out and be on Twitter and engage, maybe on Medicare, but they also talk about how much they love their kids' softball league and how much they love their corgi, then that's someone who's really well-rounded that people can have a conversation with and feel like they can get sort of an into your organization with. So looking at tapping the resources not just of your explicit social media or PR team, but looking at broadening that scope to make more people capable of speaking for your company.
So one quick question for you guys. We've been talking, we've shifted a little bit away from the original topic, which is certainly great, don't get me wrong, and believe me, I think we've given everybody a lot of very strange thoughts about what they're going to be talking about for a while. The Twitter feed is currently abuzz with AARP sex tips. One thing
I just want to say, as someone who is very proud to work at AARP, that all people age 50 plus or under deserve to have fulfilling relationships and dating.
I think it's something we can all agree upon. I just think it took a left turn that nobody saw coming. I, for one, no problems here. I'm just saying it took a bit of a turn. One question I do want to ask, though, getting back to our earlier less interesting topics that we were trying to help make more interesting. One question from Twitter asks about making boring subjects interesting, specific for blogging. And if anybody has any thoughts on tech policy, I think that might be something that would be useful to some of our audience. So blogging as a format is certainly a little bit more, has to be a little bit more thoughtful. It has to be a little bit more, put together than a simple tweet or even a Facebook post. So what are some thoughts or ideas about taking a subject that can be very dense, can be very, hard to make accessible for an audience, and how do you turn it into something that people can really enjoy?
So I would say on that, it's all about connecting to people's personal experiences or where they're coming into contact with the subject. So, for me, I talk a lot about Social Security, and Social Security is a big sort of amorphous topic, and people want to get their checks when they turn that age, but they don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of Social Security policy. And so if I'm talking about chain CPI, that's something that, I'd imagine most of our audience couldn't tell you what chain CPI means or why it's important, unless I'm way underestimating our audience. But it's something that when I'm talking to an individual who's 65, 66, 67, it means they're going to get less money in their paycheck that they can use to pay for rent or to pay for their food. And so taking it out of this broader policy discussion and instead saying, how does it impact this person? Can we tell the story of, Mary Sue in South Dakota and how this is going to make it harder for her to see her grandkids on summer vacation?
So personalizing it, the idea of making it a little bit more of a touchstone to an individual story rather than the larger, more 20,000-foot view.
Right. So taking it personal, and when there is an appropriate opportunity, connecting it with pop culture or things that are in the news. So we had one of our most popular Facebook posts this year, and you're all going to cringe at me, but I don't care. Was two seniors from California holding a sign, and it said, "Don't twerk on my benefits." Because it was right after Miley Cyrus and the VMAs, and they were very concerned about chain CPI cutting their benefits. And it was cute, and it was organic. It wasn't something that came out of our national office. They made the sign themselves. We just chose to promote it on Facebook. But it was taking something from that 20,000-foot level and making it about, this couple, making it about faces that you can get behind. I think that's really important when you're looking at blogging, tech blogging. I think a lot of what we're talking about with, internet freedom, it's easy to see sort of this 20,000-foot level, but the consumer doesn't necessarily understand what does it mean if Netflix pays Comcast, how does that impact me? And instead taking it down to that individual level so that someone can really put themselves in their shoes and understand that policy is really important.
I would say, too, personal doesn't always mean individual people. It just means something that's relatable, right, that I, as a human being, can relate to. And so one of the ways you can do that, especially if you're dealing with something like policy, where people don't remember what it's like not to have something, you can actually flip a story on its head and remove something. For example, what would you do if you couldn't port your mobile phone number? If you couldn't transfer in 15 minutes from Verizon to AT&T? Like, what would that mean? What would it mean if you still needed to, if you couldn't bring that phone number with you and you had to change phone numbers every time you moved, right? This was phone numbers are super boring, right? But everybody has one, and it's completely relatable. And so if you flip something around and you say, well, what if you couldn't do X, Y, Z? That makes it even that more relatable, and you don't need individuals to actually do that. You can still tell that story.
I would cite, just for an organization that's doing this really, really well, they're called Fight for the Future. They were one of basically the organizing force behind the 2011-2012 anti-SOPA protests, which, with all due respect to the election, I think remains one of the #1 case studies for how to go up against a very powerful lobby, the Motion Picture Association, people who are expert marketers by trade, and to dethrone them, or to legislation that they thought they had in the bag, until Wikipedia and Reddit and all these other people got involved. But yeah, it's Fight for the Future. I mean, they do a great job. I'm just looking at one of their emails right now that says they own your phone. Do they? So they do well with their emails. They're not overly produced in the sense that it's a really fancy graphic design template. They're more minimalist on the text side. Because they know that people in their audience aren't going to want to download pictures because they don't want to be tracked, for open rates. So their open rates might suck, but their conversion rates and what they get done in organization, I think, is it's fantastic. So them and Electronic Frontier Foundation, as well as Public Knowledge, on the very, very wonky side, I think do a great job with this.
So, one thing we haven't really touched on, I think we've talked about blogging and, a variety of platforms. I think I've read a lot of information that suggests that 2014 is the year of mobile video. And full disclosure, I worked at Hulu for 5 years, so video for me is something that I'm particularly, fascinated by, and I want to follow up on, and ultimately want to make sure that I stay on top of, because I think it's a very difficult space that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate. What do you guys see as being, not just forget the trends part of that, but what do you see as being the really interesting sort of new platforms or ideas? What are the new techniques that we should really be aware of as marketers? Is there something coming up, a niche thing that you're sort of following and paying attention to? Or are you looking at the bigger thematic, like video for you is also really important, or the way that we're second screening? What do you think is going to be, I guess I am asking the question, what do you think is going to be the big theme of this year and the big changes in the trends? Again, don't everybody jump at once. Well, I can get started. I would say one of the things that we should be aware of is second screen, right? The idea that as I'm watching television, my laptop or my iPad or my phone is going to be next to me telling me what my different feeds that I'm watching are having in response to the thing that I'm watching as well. Do we think that there are opportunities there for marketers to take advantage of that they're not already doing, or do you see opportunities for people to start investigating in something like that?
I mean, there's certainly a lot of opportunity in second screen, particularly from the advertising front. Twitter's made it really easy to advertise to people who are watching shows, or to do real-time marketing based on the second screen opportunities. So that's a pretty cool chance. I think we're also seeing greater market integration sort of across age demographics with second screen, which is really interesting to me. You may have more 20 and 30-year-olds watching TV and on their iPhones, but you also have more 50 and 60-year-olds watching TV and on their iPads, which is a pretty new trend, and I think a really awesome opportunity for a lot of us who are doing some of the more boring subjects, who may not have sort of the snazzy 20-something demographic, but are looking at reaching a broader audience. I think there's I don't do a ton with mobile video just because the audience that I work with. Sometimes they're a little bit behind the curve technologically. But what is really interesting is watching as iPad integration becomes so much more mainstream and becomes so much more accessible to a lot of people. So figuring out what the hurdles are there, setting up Twitter lists is basically impossible on an iPad, fun fact. So if you're trying to get someone set up on Twitter initially, that's a huge hurdle that exists. And so looking both at the opportunities, but looking at what are the things that we're battling against too, as we bring more people into the digital space and more people into the second screen space, like that.
I'll make maybe a hopeful prediction. I hope that we'll see at least a death through the reduction of sort of the hyperbolic headline. It's buzzworthy and upworthy as sites. They do really well. But, this purse isn't always the single greatest kiss for women. This isn't the greatest anti-smoking video. We're all for hopefully marriage equality, but it's not going to be the greatest love story, thing you've ever seen. And I'm just so tired of it. And it's... I think hopefully return of credibility. So if everything's the greatest or the most shocking, then hopefully these, people say that all the time, will start to be drowned out by the people who have, something more interesting to say, and that when it is, great or interesting, that you should, check it out. And I guess with that, hopefully, the death of the vanity metrics. Sometimes big numbers like Oscars or Samsung, like that's big because they broke it and they really blew it out of the water. But, if you're a smaller business or if you're just getting started, like on your first couple social accounts, whether that's, maybe helping out a restaurant or another local business. I mean, there's local businesses around the country who are pretty terrible at social media. So, just realizing like, hey, we're not going to have all these fans or followers, but I can get your work done a little bit better. It's not going to be the huge numbers, but you know what? We'll be able to track our ROI and whether or not what we're doing matters a lot more closely.
I second the end to the clickbait headline. That would be awesome. One trend that I'm actually seeing is a lot of discussion, just even amongst my friends, around technology breaks or technology vacations where people are looking to unplug and the coping that goes along with the unplugging, where I don't have my phone, my God, what do I do with my hands type comments. So I'm actually very curious to see if this becomes a thing, like the staycation became a thing. And what does that mean for us as social media marketers who, we can't get you if you don't have your stuff, but or you can't engage with us if you don't have your stuff. But where that goes, I think, I'm curious to see if it takes the route of fear of missing out or if it actually becomes a thing.
I'm also curious how that breaks down across age demographics and across income demographics, because most of the people I've seen, struggling with that are people like me who are sort of younger, more plugged in, fairly well off, able to, to have all the devices all the time. And so I'm curious to see what that looks like, because I think there are sort of conflicting trends of that and greater accessibility to social media across demographic groups. And it'll be interesting to see how those sort of coincide or conflict.
So we've got a few minutes left. Again, just want to remind everybody.
Oh.
You ain't got time for that.
Sorry about that. So it looks like we accidentally dropped Jason.
Hi, Jason.
So until he returns, hopefully, which will be shortly, we've got about 5 minutes, and I'll try to help wrap this up. Folks, if you have any questions to go forward, feel free to use the hashtag #DDAwesome. All right, it looks like we got.
You know what? You go to move a window, and Firefox closes it on you, and it's totally their fault and not mine, and I am totally confident.
Why are you using Firefox?
Because I have. You know what? Because I have a thing against Chrome in noob. You know what? I was going to ask for more questions on Twitter, but I'm going to take the next few minutes to tell all of you why you hurt my feelings. Anyway. Apologies for that. What I was going to say is that if anybody has any last-minute questions that they'd like to ask on Twitter, feel free, as I'm sure Elliot was about to say, hashtag #DDAwesome. With the last few seconds left, I would also love to just ask you guys what your thoughts are very quickly. With the news recently of everybody, sort of sounding the death knell on Facebook and its prospects. Do we think that this is premature? Do we think it's going the way of MySpace? Quick reactions.
if they keep buying companies for what they're buying, yeah, they're buying companies with no revenue for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the whole reason people are on WhatsApp because they don't want Facebook tracking and indexing their stuff. So right after they bought WhatsApp, I'm blanking out what the name is, but there was an open source competitor that just saw like a huge percentage rise in secure person-to-person messaging. So if they keep spending hundreds of billions of dollars in companies where the reason people use them, like Snapchat, is because they don't want they want the separate, smaller network for your Snapchat photos. So that will kill Facebook, if anything else. But hey, the stock is still doing well. It's going to keep doing well. They've got money. It would be nice to see them, use it to do, more of a social good thing. I saw it came up in my media monitoring that they bought drones to perhaps deliver wireless internet. So hopefully they do that without you having to have a Facebook account. Maybe they could step up their corporate social responsibility a little bit more, other than when, what's his face, Zuckerberg says something stupid.
I think if they don't. Go ahead, Sarah.
I just say, as someone in the social marketing space, it kind of doesn't matter, because I think that a lot of the principles that you can learn on Facebook are the same ones that you learn on Twitter or on Tumblr or on Pinterest or will blogging. I think a lot of it's about great visuals and about listening to people, about connecting with your audience, and about figuring out how to be part of the conversation without overwhelming it. So, like, Facebook may come and go. It may be here 20 years from now. To some extent, I don't really care, because I think that as long as I'm testing and learning and growing and figuring out all the great ways that we can communicate with our audiences, it doesn't necessarily matter so much what platform it is. It matters that we've learned the skills and the tools and how to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts. One is with the rise of mobile, and especially mobile video, which we've talked about tonight, Facebook needs to fix their mobile app, like flat out fix it now, because there are lots of things people can't do on it, and I think that's, as people take their phones with them more than their laptops, which I think we all agree that I don't think anybody would say that that's not a trend that's going to matter, and I think for Facebook that's going to be a big downside to what their platform is. But I do agree, right? You have to be platform agnostic. You have to Sarah's point, you have to continue to learn and use and be where your audience is. And, we've all seen platforms come and go. Staying ahead of the game and not just reacting to it, I think, is more important than what platforms live or die.
Very cool. Well, I'd ask another question from Twitter, but apparently everybody is making fun of me for still using Firefox. You're all terrible people, and I feel very, very sad right now. The tears, they're just not coming.
Well, no, you use Firefox for the client sites, social media accounts that you don't want to accidentally tweet from. So I use a different browser for all the clients, just so I know.
Gee, Tyler, what else could you use a separate browser for? Anyway.
Part of these private modes.
Indeed. Well, listen, we've been going for about an hour. It looks like everybody is pretty much just making fun of me at this point. So I think this is an excellent place to stop. I want to thank Tyler, Sarah, and Aaron for the opportunity to chat with them. I hope you guys have had a good time out there in the inner tubes. My name, again, is Jason Nellis over at Cheever Media. You can find me online at Jason Nellis or at OverMeCo. Digital District, it is always a pleasure to manage events for you guys. Elliot, thanks again for the opportunity. And I'm sure we'll be doing this again soon. So you guys, thanks again, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason. And just real quick, if you guys have any topics for future events, feel free to use the DDAwesome hashtag. We'll compile it all, and we'll look at other topics and try to reach out further. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening.